This portion is called Shoftim, Judges. But how shall we be governed? I guess that's a question that only the Bible can really answer, and do we follow it? Now the question is, what does it tell us about the nature of governments as the Torah understands it? Because the portion opens up with a command relating to a king. And God says in chapter Deuteronomy 17, he says, when you enter the land the Lord your God is giving you, and have taken possession of it, and settled in it, and you say, let us set a king over us like all the nations around us. Now, it goes on to say, be sure to appoint over you the king the Lord your God chooses. Question is, what does God choose? Now, in all of this, it continues with a warning. And the warning is that a king will acquire great numbers of horses for himself. But he is told not to take many wives, nor may he accumulate large amounts of silver and gold. Okay? Now look at the political spectrum of today. And what do you have? Politicians go into a government and they always seem to come out very rich, don't they? Something wrong with this picture. Okay? And we'll get down to the nitty-gritty of it in this portion. Okay? Now, a king who is appointed over the people of God, he must write a Sefer Torah, and he is to read it all the days of his life, so that he may learn to revere the Lord his God, and not consider himself better than his brothers, nor turn from the law of the Torah to the right or to the left. Now, when we look at the passages that we've just looked at, the entire passage is fraught with ambivalence. Now, dangers are clearly spelled out here. That there is a risk that a king will exploit his power. Okay? And that he will acquire wealth, wives, horses. And in ancient time, it was a status symbol of the ancient world. Now we can equate that to modern time and look at what is the symbol of today's wealth, or status symbol of today's wealth. I keep fading in now. What is that?
I'm having to adjust the sound. Sorry, this is me.
Okay. All right. Now, when we look at the biblical scenario, we find that Solomon is described as doing these things, didn't he?
Absolutely.
Okay. In the book of Kings, his heart may be led astray. He may be tempted to lord it over the people, considering himself to be better. Do we find that in today's political system? We do. Okay? Now there is an extreme warning that is struck at the outset. rather than commanding the appointment of a king, the Torah, okay, tells us that the people asked for one. Okay? God says that in Deuteronomy. When you get into the land, you get settled, and you become comfortable with everything, then you're going to ask to be like the nations and have a king over you. God is telling you prophetically what's going to happen. Okay? Why? Because the people want to be like all the nations around them. Now, this is contrary to the whole spirit of Torah. The Israelites were commanded to be different. Doesn't the word tell you that you're set apart? Okay? You are different than the world. Okay? Now, to want to be like everyone else is not, for the Torah, a noble wish, but a failure of the human imagination and a lack of nerve. Yes, Bob?
So when they finally did ask for a king over them, how much of that failing can we put at Samuel's feet? Right? 2 generations, Samuel and Eli refused to reign in their sons. And when the children of Israel asked for a king over them, they say they want a king over them in the manner that the nations have over them, but it's their explanation is because your sons do not do like you do. They don't follow after your steps. That the judges that were appointed for 2 generations there tried to appoint their children who were corrupt.
Yeah, well, I think we'll answer that in a second, how God looked at it. Okay? Now, the Israelites were commanded to be different. We're commanded to be different. Okay? And I think that we have, to some degree, failed. It is a small wonder then that a number of medieval commentators held that the creation of a monarchy is not a biblical imperative. Okay? Give you some examples. Okay? Ezra held that the Torah did not command it, but merely permitted it. Bar Banel, who favored republican government over monarchy, regarded it as a concession to the popular sentiment. However, the key passage is not here, but in 1 Samuel chapter 8. As predicted in Deuteronomy, the people did eventually request a king. They come to Samuel. He is a prophet judge, and say, "Oh, you are old, and your sons do not walk in your ways," as Bob declared. "Now appoint a king to lead us, such as all the other nations have." Now Samuel is very displeased with all of this. But God then tells him, "Listen to all that the people are saying to you. It is not you they have rejected, but they have rejected me as their king." This seems to be the heart of the matter. Israel should be under no other sovereign but God. But what about us today? Are we allowing God to be a sovereign over us? Yes, LaDonna.
Our American history.
Huh?
Our American history is much like this, with the 13 colonies in the Confederacy of those colonies. That you would say like they were like the tribes, and yet eventually they decided to have Washington, and there was a strong move among them. They wanted him to be king.
Yeah, they wanted him, but he rejected it.
And they wanted to instill, even though they were talking about the 3 branches, they wanted the executive to be very powerful. out now to kind of bring about that dream, and it's a disaster to have the executive branch so powerful. Even by name, Trump and Obama are president merely, but they are installed as kings above us. They're very powerful.
Well, but I think I'll give you some answers to all this, why and how God looks at it, if you let me continue. Okay? God did not reject the request, but to the contrary, God had already signaled through Moshe that such a request would be granted. So he says to Samuel, listen to them, but warn them and let them know what the king who will reign over them will do. The people may appoint a king, but not without having been forewarned as to what are the likely consequences. Samuel gives the warning in these words. This is what the king who will reign over you will do. He will take your sons and make them serve with his chariots and horses, and they will run in front of his chariot. He will take your daughters to be performers, cooks, bakers. He will take the best of your fields and your vineyards, olive groves, and give them to his attendants. He will take 1/10 of your grain and your vintage and give it to his officials and attendants. And you yourself will become his slaves. When that day comes, you will cry out for relief from the king that you have chosen, and the Lord will not answer you in that day. Yes, Paul?
I'd just like to say how used to slavery we must become, because 10% would seem a mild trifle compared to the taxation I'm faced with on a daily basis in this land.
Well, things have got a little bit out of sorts in this land. Now, despite the warning, okay, the people were not deviated from what they wanted. What did they say? They said, no, they said. We want a king over us. Then we will be like all the other nations, with a king to lead us and to go out before us and fight our battles. When Samuel heard all that the people said, he repeated it before the Lord. And the Lord answered and said to them, listen to them and give them a king. All right? So what is going on here? Now the sages were extremely divided whether Samuel was setting out the powers of the king or whether he was merely trying to dissuade them from the whole project. The entire passage, like the one in Deuteronomy, is profoundly ambivalent. Is God in favor of a monarch or is he against it? Now, if he is in favor, why did he say that the people's request was tantamount to rejecting him? If he is against, why did he not simply command Samuel to say no? You see, the best analysis of the subject was given by one of the great rabbis of the 19th century. So he writes, okay, and he says the people recognize that they cannot function as individuals without someone having the power to ensure the rule of law and the defense of the nation. Without this, they are in what Hobbes calls a state of nature. We know that what happens is anarchy ensues. chaos. No one is safe. Instead of a very famous phrase that comes from Hobbes, he says, there is continual fear and danger of violent death, and the life of a man solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Hobbes was writing in the wake of the English Civil War. This is the Hobbesian equivalent of the last line in the book of Judges. In those days, Israel had no king, and everyone did as he saw fit. Okay? The only way to escape from anarchy is by everyone agreeing to transfer some of their rights, especially the use of cohesive force, to a human sovereign. Government comes at a very high price, does it not? Okay? It means transferring, okay, to a ruler. And what happens is rights are given over property and you as a person. Yeah.
So when Hobbes writes that, the book he writes from, I believe, is titled Leviathan, and it's very interesting with the things you've said in this portion already, how it mirrored some of the items in this portion mirrored what Solomon did. Hobbes calls the Leviathan, or the monarch, to be put up. He calls him a no-law man.
Yeah.
Why he puts laws on everybody else, we subjugate him to no laws. And Solomon, who collected 666 talents of gold from the nations, was a type of anti-Messiah, who is a no-law man, who is to come.
Well, there are problems with each and every one, okay? The king is entitled to seize property, impose taxes, conscript people into the army, if these are necessary to ensure the rule of law and national security. Now, people agree to this because they calculate that the price of not doing so will be higher still, total anarchy or a conquest by a foreign power. Now, Samuel, okay, at God's command, proposing a social contract and spelling out what the results would be. If this is so, many things follow. The first is that Ezra and our Bar-Banel were right. God gave the people the choice as to whether or not to appoint a king. It was not compulsory, but optional. The second, and this is the fundamental feature of social contract theories, is that power is ultimately vested in the people. Okay? To be sure, there are moral limits to power. Even a human king is under the sovereignty of God. God gives us rules that are eternal. Okay? Now, what is politics all about? Laws that are only temporary. They are changed. They will change. Now, they are for this time, this place, these circumstances. What makes politics of the social contract distinctive is its insistence that government is the free choice of a free nation. What is happening in America? They choose, and with choice there is consequences. Okay? Now, since the laws of a monarchy pertain to the general situation of the people, these legal rights revert into the absence of a king. To the people as a whole, specifically, it would seem that any leader, a shofet, who arises in Israel has the status of a king. Didn't Melech yes, Lord, in many respects, especially when it concerns the conduct of the people. So whoever leads the people may rule in accordance with the laws of kingship, since these encompass the needs of the people at that time and in each situation. Now, in other words, in the absence of the king of the Davidic line, the people may choose to be ruled by a non-Davidic king. They were to be ruled instead by a democratically elected parliament, like what they have today in Israel, kind of what we have in America. Now, the real issue in our Torah portion, and as the Torah sees it, is not between a monarchy and democracy, but it's between government that is or is not freely chosen by the governed. To be sure, the Torah is systematically skeptical about politics. In the ideal world, Israel would be governed by God alone, would it not? In the ideal world of us, we would be ruled by God alone and nobody else. But that's not the way it is. We don't live in an ideal world. Okay? There must be some human power with authority to ensure that laws are kept and enemies are repelled. But that power is never unlimited. It comes with two constraints. First, it is subject to the genuine pursuit of the people's interest. Okay? Now, secondly, it is confined to the genuine pursuit of the power for personal advantage. Now, this is an attempt by a ruler to use the power, as in the case of, we find biblically, King Ahab and Naboth's vineyard, 1 Kings 21. Okay? A free society has its birth always in the Hebrew Bible. From the Torah is the blueprint of all societies in reality. A society built on freedom and human dignity, whose high ideals remain compelling to this very day. So what about a government? What is their real purpose? Is it, if they're going to lead, what is the bottom line? The bottom line is that they are to serve, not rule. Just like we find in the Torah, we are to serve who? God. Okay? So, we come back to the statement that when you enter the land that the Lord your God is giving you, and have taken possession, settled in it, you say, I will set a king over me like all the surrounding nations, a king whom the Lord your God chooses, Deuteronomy 17. So, it should be relatively easy to answer the question, is having a king a good thing or a bad thing? Well, actually, it's kind of an unanswerable question. Okay, on the one hand, the Parsha does say, set over you a king. Maimonides calls it a positive command counted among the 613. Now, on the other hand, okay, it does say that it is to be acted on when the people say that they want to be like the surrounding nations. Now the Torah doesn't tell us to be like everyone else, does it? Okay? The word Kodesh means holy. So what does it roughly mean to us? Okay? To be set apart. Okay? Singular, distinctive, unique. Okay? Jews are supposed to have the courage to be different. Okay? And to be different from the surrounding world. I think the matter is made very clear here. Okay? So what does God tell us in the episode of Israelites? Did they actually ask for a king in the days of Samuel in Samuel 1:8? Samuel is upset. He thinks that people are rejecting him. Well, God again, as we've already stated, is that the people are rejecting God, not Samuel. Yet God does not command Samuel to resist the request. To the contrary, he says, in effect, tell them what monarchy will cost. And we went through those costs. But we look at the biblical record, and it doesn't seem to resolve the issue. Because bad kings come and good kings come, do they not? Bad leaders come and good leaders come. We can see that playing itself out in America today and in many other nations across the world. Okay? The Tanakh says he did evil in the eyes of God. But then there were also good kings. David, he unified the nation. Solomon, he built the temple. Hezekiah, Josiah, who led religious revivals. Now, it would be easy to say, on the whole, monarchy was a bad thing. Okay? But without the King Davids, the Solomons, even the bad kings and the good ones, Israel would never have risen to the heights that it did. Even within individual lives. Okay? Look at David. He was a military hero, political genius, a religious poet. But he also was a man who committed a grievous sin with another man's wife. Solomon, the record is even more checkered. Okay? His name was synonymous with wisdom and the author of the Song of Songs, Proverbs, and the such. At the same time, he broke all three of the Torah's rules about monarchs. Okay? Namely, he should not have too many wives. How many did he have?
400 wives, 700 concubines.
Yeah, he had, well, they were all wives, so he had about 1,000.
And that's too many. All right.
Well, yeah, that's a little too many. It's a little above the scale. Okay? Now, what about this? On the one hand, he did great things for God. On the other hand, he did grievous sin before God. The Torah tells him not to have too many wives, not to have too many horses, not to have too much money. Solomon, as the Talmud says, thought he could break all the rules and stay uncorrupted. Despite all of his wisdom, he finally came to understand he was wrong. Okay? even stepping back and seeing matters on the basis of abstract principles, we have, as close as Judaism comes to contradiction. On the one hand, we have no king but you declared by the people. Okay, on the other hand, the closing sentence of the book of Judges 21:25 reads, "In those days there was no king in Israel, and everyone did what was right in his own eyes." In short, without a monarchy, there seems to be anarchy. What's happening in America today? Okay? We have rejections of leadership on both sides. And we have anarchy beginning to display itself in the nation. So in answer to the question, is having a king a good thing or a bad thing? Well, I would say that the answer is unequivocally yes and no. And as we would expect, the great commentators run the entire spectrum of the interpretation. One would tell you having a king is a good thing, positive command. Ezra, it was permission, not an obligation. Again, our Barbanel, it was a concession due to human weakness. Rabbi Bakya, it was its own punishment. Now, the Torah seems to be very ambivalent about the central element of its political program. Now, let's see, is there a simple answer? Actually, it was given, and you probably know part of this man's quote, is by an outsider of the Torah teachers. He seemed to have saw clearly the Hebrew Bible, and it was one of the world's first tutorals in freedom. His name is Lord Acton. He is a man who wrote, "Thus the example of the Hebrew nation laid down the parallel lines on which all freedom has been won. The principle that all political authorities must be tested and reformed according to a code which was not made by man." Okay? But he is also the originator of a very classical statement. And I know we've all heard this. All power tends to corrupt. And absolute power corrupts absolutely. So now you know who made that statement. Lord Acton. Okay? So now, because I've quoted it, and others have quoted it, that power corrupts and ultimate power corrupts absolutely. Okay? Now, the Torah is a sustained exploration of the question, okay, on the basis of power. Okay? Individuals are different. So let's talk about a few. Michelangelo, Shakespeare, Rembrandt. They needed no power to achieve creative genius. But can a society as a whole? We all have desires, do we not? Okay? Now those desires conflict. What does conflict usually bring? Violence. The result is the world before the flood. So we're going all the way back to the beginning, when God regretted that he had made man on the earth. Hence, there is no need for a central power to ensure the rule of law. And the defense of the realm. Judaism is not an argument for powerlessness. Okay? Daily we should thank God and all of his helpers down here on the earth for the existence of the state of Israel and the restoration to the Jewish people the power of self-defense, itself a necessary condition of the collective rights to life. Instead, Judaism is an argument for the limitation, secularization, and transformation of power. Let's talk about these three terms. Limitation. Israel's kings were the only rulers in the ancient world without the power to legislate. For us, the laws that matter come from God. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
To be sure, kings may issue temporary regulations for the better ordering of society, but so many rabbis, courts, and local councils, okay, can do the same. Secularization. Now, in Judaism, kings were not high priests, and high priests were not kings. Jews were the first people to create a separation of power. Kind of unique. It all comes in the Bible, doesn't it? A doctrine normally attributed, okay, back to the Hasmonean rulers. They sought to combine the two offices. These were the sons of the Maccabees. Okay? And the Talmud records the objection of the sages. Let the royal crown be sufficient for you. Leave the priestly crown to the descendants of Aaron. So, separation of power. Yes, Bob?
So, we see in Moses a king priest, and we see when Messiah returns, it says he'll have no issue between fulfilling both offices. But we see in the example of the kings of Israel that whenever they attempted to or were lifted up in their heart, that was like the prize that they attempted to get, and it always didn't win. It always didn't win, right? We have Uzziah, who did it, lifted up, and was struck with leprosy for the remainder of his life.
Well,
Right? And why did he want that? Because that's the pinnacle. That's the one that's saying, I am the chosen one of God. And yet Messiah had it and refused to step into it because the people weren't right. And in this Torah portion, we have the laws of the powers of the high priest that Messiah followed even when they were not lawfully instilled. Right? He followed them. And I think that shows some forward thinking in that when he takes the position, he won't be able to be questioned. Because he didn't question even to death. That's why it says he was silent.
you know why Moses was able to do what he did? Because God was right in the middle of it, and as they all got out of line, what happened?
He was in the camp.
Okay? It got straightened out real quick. Okay? So, when King David, okay, didn't have God directing every footstep and every word, he got in trouble.
What did David get? David got a prophet. You don't see the prominence of the prophets. You could wind up with judges before. You see the prominence of the prophets when there's kings, because now there's an institution that can buck the will of God that's institutionalized, so it can go from generation to generation. It's not changed. That was the whole point of the judges. God took judges, put them in power, took them down. Picked another one, put them in.
That's true.
He didn't do that when he's given to the kings. Because then the kings instill their judges, their officers, and their people throughout. Now it's institutionalized. In this Torah portion, it says that in all the tribes there would be judges appointed throughout the land, in all the areas. So if somebody falls out of line, like Samuel's sons, and follows after filthy lucre and bribes and becomes a scoundrel, God essentially just removes him by raising up a more powerful judge, because there are many of them.
Sure, there was prophets.
Well, prophets come on the scene more so, or become much more prominent, once we have kings.
Well, you have the example of Jezebel and Ahab. What happened to them when God got fed up with the whole thing?
Sent a prophet.
Yeah, he raised up prophets against them, but then Jezebel was ate by the dogs in the streets. Okay?
How many years did she persecute the saints, though?
Well, God is long-suffering. Okay? More so than humans are. Now, a transformation is the other term, the third one. It's fundamental to Judaism, is the idea of a servant leadership. There is a wonderful statement that we find in this parsha. The king must have his own Torah. Okay? And he shall read from it all the days of his life, not consider himself superior to his kinfolk or straying from the commandments to the right or to the left. Humility is the essence of royalty, because to lead is to serve. Now, when there's a failure to remember this, okay, then you lose retrospection of yourself. Paul said that we are to what? Examine ourselves daily. Now, we find disastrous political decisions in Jewish history were made after the death of Solomon. The people came to Rehoboam, his son, asking him to lighten the load that Solomon's projects had imposed on the people. The king asked his father's advisors what he should do. They told him to concede to their request. Now, if today you will be a servant to those people and serve them and give them a favorable answer, they will always be your servants. 1 Kings 12:7. What's happening in America today? They want to tax you. They want to tax you. They want to tax you. They want to enslave you. Okay? So, you've got one group that wants to hold them back. You've got another group that wants to be free to do whatever they want to do. Now, in this verse 12:7, there is a threefold appearance of the word serve in this verse. Now, what did Rehoboam did? He ignored their advice. What came of it? The kingdom was split, and the nation never fully recovered. Now, the radical nature of this transformation can be seen by recalling the two great architectural symbols of the world and the world's first empires. The Mesopotamian built ziggurats. The Egyptians built pyramids. Both are monumental statements in stone of their hierarchy. Kind of interesting, they're broad at the base and they are narrow at the top. The people are there to support the leader. The great Jewish symbol, the menorah, inverts the triangle. It is broad at the top, narrow at the base. The leader is there to support the people. What is our government set up on originally? They were men who were to support the people, to serve them. They have lost the vision of this. Now, in a contemporary term, a man named Jim Collins, in his book From Good to Great, he tells us on the basis of extensive research that the great organizations are those with what he calls level 5 leaders, people who are personally modest but fiercely ambitious for the team. They seek not their own success, but the success of those that they lead. Okay? Now, we think of leaders as people hungry for power. Well, many are. But remember, power corrupts, does it not? Even in the failure of Solomon's wisdom, it could not save him from temptation. Hence the life-changing idea to lead is to serve. The greater your success, the harder you have to work to remember that you are there to serve others. They are not there to serve you. So let me give you a life-changing idea. To lead is to serve, okay? So the greater your success, okay, the harder you have to work. So remember, who are we here to serve? We're here to serve God, are we not? Okay? God is not here to serve us. We are to serve Him. And what is God's plan? God's plan is to bring His Word to the world. So, if we're to serve God, then those that God has put out there, that God wants to affect them in 3 things: morality, integrity, ethics. These basically is the core of what we should disseminate to the rest of the world by serving them. Morality matters more than ever in a world divided by 2 things: fear and faithlessness. So what happens to a national identity? Let's bring it home here. When everything holding a nation together begins to disappear or disintegrate. What happens to a society when the focus of a culture is on the self and its icon is the selfie? How many times do you see people taking little selfies? Okay? What happens when Google filters and Facebook friends divide us into non-communicating sects of like-minded? And what happens to morality when the mantra is no longer we're all in this together, but rather I'm free to be myself? Sound like today? Okay? All right. So in the course of all this, okay, what will emerge from all of this is that morality matters more than we commonly acknowledge. It's all we have left to bind us into a shared responsibility. And that responsibility is for the common good of every man, every family, every nation. Morality is our oldest and most powerful resource for turning disconnected eyes, and I hear it too much today, the I syndrome, into a collective we. It's the alchemy that turns selfless genes into selfless people. Okay? Ecologist. I'm going to give you a term. Everything today is broke out into generational. And I asked a guy, he went back to the 60s generation, then he went to the 70s and 80s, and then he went to the Y generation, then he went to the millennials. Well, there's a new term, generation that's 1995 to about 2013, and they're all got names. Aren't we all we, no matter how old you are? Okay? So, our job is striving, okay, with compassion for others, a moral concern for others. What is going to destroy a nation is when it loses its moral guidance. America is well on its way. Okay? Calling evil good and good evil. Now, what does demoralization mean? Okay? It means what it does. It's a loss of confidence. It's a loss of enthusiasm. It's a loss of hope. And it all boils back to morality. We are left without morality as anxious individuals. We find ourselves lonely, vulnerable, depressed, struggling to survive in a world that is changing faster than we can bear and becoming more unsuitable by the day. So, we find when we look at the study of American children born in and about 1995, I'll give you an answer. The first generation have grown up with smartphones, okay, is one of the participants in a radio series that is done by Jean Twigg. Now, she told about a discovery that rates of self-ascribed life satisfaction among American teenagers. Now, it plummeted in about 2012 while depression set in, suicide rocketed upward. Again, it was girls who were the most vulnerable. Her view is that the social media, smartphone addiction have played a significant part in this pathology. Young people were spending between 7 and 9 hours a day on their phones. What do I find in my granddaughter Emma? My daughter gives her cell phone to play with. What is that teaching her? My 13-year-old granddaughter can't get off her cell phone or her computer. Okay, what does all this do to children when they're spending the majority of their waking hours on them? Well, the result is a loss of social skills, shortened attention spans, sleep deprivation. Now, I can attest to all of this because I've seen it firsthand. But above all, anxiety. Seeing their friends' posts, they're subject to fear of missing out. It's called the FOMO. And constantly comparing themselves with the burnished image of their contemporaries. It's called the I-Jeeters. She says they are scared, maybe even terrified. They are both the physical safest generation and the most mentally fragile. This is the I-Gen, or everything millennials are not. Okay? So what is all this doing to our children? When we raise them according to God's word, then fear is not an equation that they will see or feel. Or, okay, you may think that this I-Gen generation is the safest. It is the most fragile. The second result charted by another participant in the series is the American social psychologist Jonathan Haddad is an assailant on free speech taking place in the universities and the campuses today. His new book published is called The Coddling of the American Mind, subtitled How Good Intentions and Bad Ideas Are Set Up a Generation for Failure. It tells of how the new ideals of safe spaces, trigger warnings, and no platforming, despite their good intentions, can screen out from the university life views and voices that fail to fit the prevailing canons of political correctness. This is being done in the name of right not to be offended. The walls, okay, even in a broadcasting house in England, states, if liberty means anything at all, it means the right to tell people what to do, what they do not want to hear. Now, this is closely related to a third phenomenon playing an even larger part in liberal democracy, namely idea politics. You heard that one? Okay. There was a time until recently when politics aspired to be about what is best for the nation. One of the lasting unintended consequences of multiculturalism is that we no longer think of the nation as a whole. Instead, the electorate has been fragmented into a series of subcultures defined by ethnic divides, religion, gender, sexual orientation. These can easily become competitive interest groups, less concerned with the common good than with what is good for those like me. Sound like America? We're there. Okay? Now, what happens, each of these groups can be encouraged by the mode of our time to see itself as a victim. We find that as a problem today. Victimhood. And to identify an oppressor who can be blamed for their current predicament. Now this gives rise to divisive politics that divides the society. What is happening in America? Like the dualism of old, into the children of light and the children of darkness. It also provides a justification for the use of social media to manipulate public opinion. By fake news, alternative facts, when it comes to defending your group against oppressors, people think that the end justifies the means. Now, these are very dangerous tendencies, both at an individual and collective level. Now, what do we find in our society today? Many of the best-selling books that you find are self-help books about anxiety and depression on the one hand, and on the other hand, a string of books with titles such as How Democracy Died, The Suicide of the West, and The Retreat of Western Liberalism. Now, what connects the personal and the political was given a name more than a century ago by a great sociologist. His name was Durkheim. He called it anomy, a state of instability in societies and individuals resulting from the breakdown of a shared set of moral beliefs and attitudes. This would lead, he thought, to a rise in suicide. Do we have a suicide problem? We do, don't we? As well as a loss of social cohesion. Do we have that? Okay. Now, let's go back to the 60s. We have come to believe that you can outsource morality to the market and the state. The market is about wealth, is it not? The state is about power. The market gives us choices, and the state deals with consequences of those choices. Within these parameters, we can do whatever we like so long as it does not directly harm others. We have that problem today. We do, don't we? Okay? Now, this will only work in the short term. Long term, when all that matters is wealth and power, the wealthy and the powerful gain, and the poor and the powerless will suffer. Okay? That's what has happened for at least a generation. Hence, what do you get? Anger. You get a loss of trust. Today, divided societies throughout the West. There is an alternative. Morality. Morality has been humanity's internal satellite navigating system. As we have journeyed towards the undiscovered country called the future, and we all ponder what's going to happen next, it has taken different forms, but it is always about caring for the good of others, not just ourselves. It's about decency. It's about honesty. It's about faithfulness. It's about self-restraint. Treating others as we would wish to be treated. It's the world of the we, not the I's. Now, while the market and the state are about competition, morality is about cooperating. You find morality's got to start in the families, then to the community, then voluntary organizations and religious congregations. Okay? Virtue is the basis of a strong society. And we all can each make a contribution. Now, remember, you change one life for the better, and you've begun to change the world. Morality is the redemption of our solitude. With it, we can face the future without fear, knowing that we are not alone. And it boils down to God, does it not? So the bottom line to our Torah portion, if we bring it down to our future and to our today, we find that all of these evil things are in our world, in our society, and we are disintegrating because the church has hid this morality in its buildings and has not taken it to the world.
Amen.
They don't have it in their buildings anymore.
Well,
So what happened?
yes and no. They have a place, okay? And they hide in them. And they hide what they think is morality in their homes, but they don't go beyond it. So what are we going to do? God says, if you change one or bring salvation to one person, it's as if you have saved the whole world. One begets another, and another begets another, and so on and so forth. I think the church has lost that concept. Okay? They used to go out and to gather children because they believed in the concept, suffer little children come unto me, unto who? Unto God. And what will happen? Because they are like the kingdom of God. A child can change a whole family. God. And so, what are we doing? What are we going to do next? Are we living a life of morality like we should? Or are we hiding our concepts of what we believe about God in a world that is full of fears and hopelessness? We find suicide rates on the upswing. We find it as affecting children. I hear about it in schools. Children I did not grow up with fears and anxieties. Okay? I find that the children of today are. And suicide becomes their last hope to escape the reality of what the world has brought upon our structure as we have built it. But we can change it. Now, I gave all this to you to let you know and bring it all home. This is where our society is at. It is crumbling under our feet. And you need to remember, it rains on the just as well as the unjust. Okay? How the people of God go, okay, is how the world will go. We find in Israel's rejection of God, what did it bring upon them? God's judgment. What is coming upon America? Go look at the Bahamas. The people are wanting to get out of the Bahamas as fast as they can because they can't live there. They're now stating that it is only fit for animals because it totally wiped it out. Can the prayer of the righteous deter a hurricane? Well, let me give you an example. Me and Brenda were in Mississippi. Okay? We had hit a storm. Now, we pulled into a rest stop because they said take cover that this storm, this tornadoes were on the move, okay? And the hail was the size of softballs. Do you think what that would do to you if you got hit by one or more? So what happened? The people were all in the building in fear. The storm was upon us. So what did I do? I went out the door, and Brenda was listening to the broadcast. Come on up, Brenda. Put your hand here. Okay? Brenda was listening to the broadcaster I was outdoors, standing facing the storm, praying. All right? And here all these people were driving in to this rest stop with a building, huddled as far from windows and everything else as they could be. And I walked out the doors and stood facing the storm praying. What happened, Brenda? Put your mic on.
DJ was following this storm, tornado, on the Doppler, and he was talking about how it looked like this huge, imposing monster, he said, when he was talking. And and then it went away. He said, I'm watching this, I don't believe this. He says, but it's dissipating. And it did. And it did, absolutely.
We're talking within minutes, the temperature.
Yes.
Okay. He said that when the temperature drops down to a certain level, you get tornadoes. From tornadoes, you can get giant hailstones. Okay? And he said that the Doppler dropped, and then all of a sudden, he said within a few minutes, when I was out praying,
That's true.
okay, that the temperature rose and warmed up to where there was no tornadoes and no hail. Everything stopped within minutes. Now, that was all done not out of the will of man, but out of prayer to God.
Trusting him.
Okay? And the people were saved by God. Now, what about this hurricane Dorian, yeah. What about Dorian? Now, they're saying that there are 5 more like it gathering in the Atlantic Ocean. Okay? This storm devastated the Bahamas, wiped it out. When you see the pictures, there's nothing there but rubble. Okay? Can we, as a people of God, stand facing the storm, pray, and get our God to move on our behalf for others? I believe we can. But we have to have courage to face the storms of life for others. Amen? Yes, Bob.
I think that that's what Scripture's talking about. He says there will come a time where 10 will cleave onto the skirt of one Jew and say, I know God is with you, right? In this Torah portion, we read about the laws of the sanctuary cities in the Bible, of where the laws of the cities of the manslayer go, right? And it dawned on me, though, that you flee there, and it says that if one flees there who did hate his brother before and tries to claim sanctuary, that when you find out that he's guilty, you'll take him on the slam, and you think, how could you know for a fact? And I remember Moses with the man gathering sticks. He just went in and asked. He was able to make inquiry of the Almighty. And then I think of Messiah. It says he perceived within himself. And then we're told the gifts of the ghost, one of them is perception of these sort of things. So the idea being that they should never err in the judgment, right? That the judgment should be completely correct and proper. And then I think to Paul and his letters to the Corinthians and his letters to the Galatians, when he was far away, he knew what was going on there. He knew what was going on, right? And then I look and I say, why don't we see these things operating inside of our own bodies as much anymore when it says, don't you know that we will judge all things? Even put judgment before the least of the brethren among you, and they should be able to render a correct judgment. And why have we lost that? My thought is because everybody wants to put themselves in a seat of judgment, but nobody wants to receive any judgment or what it takes to get there. When the whole nation before was supposed to be a nation of receiving and giving judgment. Every every Israelite should have been trained up enough in the mountain of priests that they knew the whole of the Torah. And I've said this many, many times before. The Torah is what gives you understanding of good and evil. We got knowledge of good and evil in the fall, but the Torah is what helps you to understand what is actually good and what is actually evil. And by the study of Torah through your life, you should be able to know what the right course of action is in every single situation in life. What's the right or wrong? Who's the guilty? Who's whatever. But it's really because it's a form of godliness but denies the power thereof. We don't equate the fact that when we sin or transgress or we do one of these things, that judgment is coming. Just because it's not instant doesn't mean you haven't already planted the seed of it in your life. It says when he returns, he will appoint us to be judges and officers and priests and Levites. That's what it says. He says he will take some to be judges, some to be Levites, some to be officers. And there's another interesting thing in there. The Torah has police officers. People that walk around and guys can say, oh, you should be doing this.
Yeah.
Oh, you should be, wait a minute, are you refusing to do that? I will haul you before the judge. You know? And if you think about it, how can we make these little mistakes in our life? Who's ever gotten through their house and looked and said, oh my goodness, the Passover's coming, and I missed this thing of blood. I did whatever. Whereas when we were living in communities where we all would have been looking in all of our homes and helping and doing these things. We've come to a point where Israel now or America now, these are societies based on individual rights, which lead towards transgression, rather than societies based on responsibility and morality, where the fear of God stops transgression. You literally don't have the opportunity to transgress under the system without being caught, which tells you that there was a state where there was transgression there. And that's why I say, how much you know is on the place of people like Eli and Samuel in this, and that they appointed their sons, but yet they tried to correct their sons, but did they remove them? Did they remove them until they were ready? You know, man wants to do what he sees in the natural. Do we realize that we plant the seed of judgment? Or you know what I should say better? We plant the seed of reward. Whether the reward is good or evil, in all of our actions, we are planting seeds that are going to come to fruition. There is no question about that.
Well, but in the interim, until God takes full control, we can make a difference.
We make a difference every day.
Well,
For the good or the bad.
yeah, but I would prefer it to be for the good.
Amen to that.
Okay? All right? And if we follow Torah, we can make a difference for the good.
Absolutely.
Yes, Murray.
There's an awesome verse that I asked Brenda about a number of years ago when I asked her about tribulation. This topic that we're talking about is really addressed extremely well. Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 30. Even when thou art in the latter days, in tribulation, if you call on your God, read the rest of it, I don't remember the rest of it. It is an awesome statement to all of us because he predicted, or I think God predicted, that they're going to fall away. And that's what Deuteronomy is. When you read the entire text of Deuteronomy, you're going to see this falling away topic come up over and over and over. What do you do when you're in the latter days? That's the best one to really give you a warm heart, spiritual good advice. All right.
Absolutely.
So, what I'm encouraging you today is, here's the problem, and we can infect a change from God's perspective upon the problem. Pray without ceasing.
Rabbi, what is one of your saying that you like to say that the Old Testament, that people call it the Old Testament, and say, oh, it's done away with. That was the mean, however you said it. The Old Testament is full of grace. The first thing is to see the grace, right?
Yeah.
You've preached that ever since I came here 20 some odd years ago. And I have to look at that and say, does the pattern change? Every time the people fell away, God begged the people to come back. Begged the people to let him not pass judgment.
Yes.
Right? The throne is the mercy seat.
Mercy.
But you gotta come to it.
True.
That's right. That's right.
First, we have to come. Then we can help bring them. I believe